In Jesus' name, chapter 21. I'm going to try this. I have a little bit of a cold, so excuse me if I sniff or sneeze. Relapsing on my cold. All right. It's December 16th, 5 p.m., Monday evening at the Hopewood Chapel Church of Christ, Huntington Beach, California. Banny parked his car next to Bristol's Camry and headed into the building. He was bound and determined to spend an evening with Bristol. Even a whole night if he could seduce her or get her drunk enough. Though she was such a goody-goody, she'd probably turn down a drink. He trotted up the stairs and went straight to the church office. He could see her through the slightly open blinds that hung over the small door window. She was working on the computer. He tried to open the door, but it was locked, and that little fact caused his temper to flare. So he rapped sharply on the door. She jumped in her chair and then held a finger up to tell him to hold on a second. She hit a few more keys on the keyboard, scooted her chair out, and came to the door. He immediately tried to come in, but she wouldn't move. Sorry, Banny, I'm not allowed to let anyone in the office. Are you kidding me? She shrugged. New rules. Is a reverend here? He asked, glancing down toward the new office. No, he went home about an hour ago. He drew a deep breath. Well, okay then. Forcing a smile, he backed up a few steps. So, are you ready to go? She swallowed. Banny, I told you I had plans with Melody. And I told you that plans with her shouldn't trump plans with your boyfriend. Well, they wouldn't trump them if I'd planned something with you first. But I already had plans with Mel. What plans? I'm going to a birthday party for Logan's cousin. She started to tremble when he looked like he was going to explode. She glanced back over her shoulder to look at the clock on the wall. Mel is coming to pick me up. She should be here any second. Well, when she gets here, maybe I'll talk to her, and she won't have her feelings hurt when you change your plans. Bristol's breath hitched. She tried to stay calm. Shrugging her shoulders, she smiled. Well, you can talk to her if you want. Let me finish up in here, and maybe she'll be here by the time I'm done. It'll only be a few minutes. Sighing, he nodded. I'll just sit in the chapel. She nodded and quickly closed the office door. Banny wanted to scream when he heard her click the lock. He headed to the chapel, intending to slump down in a pew and make some personal calls, but when he entered, he saw that wasn't going to happen. Two men were in the chapel, one in the back in what was the new control booth, and one on a very high scaffolding type deal. The one in the control booth nodded at him and smiled. Hello. Banny nodded. Hello. So, what are you guys working on? He smiled. Well, we're adding some lighting that can be controlled remotely so that during a program it can be changed. Why would you want to do that? Well, let's say it's a very sad or reverent type song. The lights could go to blue. Or if it's a bright, high-paced song, they could turn the lights up to white, and they can move them around like spot someone. Banny nodded. That sounds like a lot of trouble. Well, it's pretty standard, though this one was kind of tricky. Why was it tricky? Because the ceiling is so high? Oh, no, we're used to that. But this one has so many security cameras that we have to be careful about the placements of the lights so that they don't get in the way of the cameras. We've actually had to reset some of the security cameras. Banny looked up at the ceiling. I don't see any cameras. The man smiled and nodded. Yeah, these aren't your regular easy-to-spot cameras. They're so tiny, even I had a hard time finding them. He pointed straight up. You see that? It looks like a bolt is right there in that beam. It took Banny several seconds to spot it, but finally he nodded. That's a camera? Yep. It's amazing, huh? Yeah, amazing, he mumbled. And then something occurred to him. So, do these cameras have audio? Oh, yes. They pick up everything. Like the conversation we're having right now. It'll be clear as a bell. That's Ameritech for you. Banny frowned. So, you're just putting the cameras in today? Oh, no, we're putting in some lighting. The cameras have been here since last week. Security was one of the first things they arranged when they inspected the building. You know those Kinos, they don't do anything halfway. Banny's mind was racing. If the cameras were placed on Monday, then on Tuesday, when he'd made a move on Bristol's sexy friend, it was all caught on camera and on audio. And then he remembered something else. Sweet Melody had been sleeping, and he had been worried that she'd overheard his conversation with Deuce. Even if she was telling the truth and she hadn't heard it, it had been recorded. He wondered if anyone else had monitored the security video. The more he thought about it, the more he started to panic. Ever since that day, Bristol had been acting strange. He hadn't been able to be alone with her since then. She had been avoiding him. Something was wrong, and he realized it was because they'd heard him. They knew what he'd said to Deuce. They had to know. That is the only thing that made sense. And what he said to Deuce was pretty much a confession of what he intended to do to get the Palmas' money, which was marry Bristol and kill her off. But maybe they didn't know, because the old lady was as sweet and friendly as ever. She even gave him access to her safe. But maybe they didn't tell her because they didn't want to upset her. He needed to be sure. He needed to calm down. What are the chances that anyone had actually seen the security footage of that day? That was the day they decorated the Christmas trees. That was the day he'd accosted Melody. If she tried to tell Bristol, which she did, and Bristol didn't believe her, then she would have suggested that they watch the security feed to prove that she wasn't lying or mistaken. So why, then, if they watched it, does Bristol act like she believes him and not her friend? But she's not acting like that, is she? He thought. If she thought her friend was making false accusations against her boyfriend, she would stop being friends with her. Instead, she was going off with her, instead of him. They know, he realized. He was so mad at their attempt to play him that he felt like crashing through the office door and beating her to a pulp. Strangle the life out of her and watch her body drop. He had to act fast. They didn't know that he knew that they knew. He had to act fast. A plan was coming together in his mind. He was going to get his revenge, get the damn money and jewelry and hightail it out of state. He went out on the porch of the church and waited, and when he saw Melody drive up, he turned and went to the office. Bristol was just coming out, and he smiled at her. "Oh, well, I was just coming to tell you that your friend just drove up." Bristol nodded. "Thanks. She texted me to let me know she was almost here." "Okay, well, it looks like I've lost this round. I'll walk you out. Anyway, I have a little something for you. It's in the back of my car. I guess you can call me sentimental." Bristol gave a slight smile. He watched her closely. He could tell she was nervous. She was scared of him, and the only reason she had to be scared would be if she'd heard what he'd said to Deuce the other day. Yep, he was going to have to get drastic. There was no other way out. They walked down the church steps together and turned right to head to the parking lot. Melody parked next to Bristol's car and stood at the back of her car, a smile on her beautiful face. Banny nodded. She wasn't a bit scared. She was a fighter. He looked right at her and grinned, and she rolled her eyes, and he chuckled, and she wasn't going to be so feisty in a few minutes. "Hey, Mel," Bristol said, the relief in her voice evident. "Hi, Bristol," Melody answered brightly, then shifted her eyes to Banny. "Hello." He grinned. "Nice to see you, too," he chirped. "Look, I know I've lost, and you get to have Bristol with you tonight. But I have a little something for her in the back of my car, so you two pretty ladies step over here and I'll grab it." They politely followed him over, thinking to placate him so he'd just go away. He opened the hatchback of his Kia Soul and leaned in. He grabbed up what he wanted, came out quickly, and before anyone could react, he grabbed Melody in a headlock and put a gun to her temple. "There now," he said as he squeezed off her air supply. "How's that for a surprise?" Bristol's eyes were wide with shock. "Banny!" she screamed. "Please don't hurt her." "You keep your voice down or she's dead," he said quietly. She nodded as tears poured down her face. Okay, I will. I'm sorry, but please, Banny, please don't hurt her." "If she gets hurt, it will be because of you. Now just be quiet and do what I say, and you'll be fine. We'll all be fine, okay?" She nodded and sniffed. "Okay." "Get your keys out because you're driving." She fumbled with her purse, but finally pulled the keys out. Banny whispered to Melody, "We're just going to move a few steps over to Bristol's car. Bristol, open the trunk." Bristol began to cry again, but did as he ordered. He pushed Melody to sit down on the edge of the trunk. Okay, Bristol, open the passenger side of my car and reach into that black toolbox and bring me that roll of duct tape. And if you try anything, I'll just shoot her in the head. You got it? Yes, she mumbled as tears ran down her face. He kept the gun pressed against Melody's head. Okay, hold your hands out together, and Bristol, you tape them up. Bristol started doing as ordered, but she was shaking so badly she could barely do it. Tighter, he ordered. Faster. When Bristol finally finished taping Melody's hands, he told her to wrap a large piece over her mouth and around her head. As soon as she finished, he raised a gun and pistol-whipped Melody in the head, and she collapsed into the open trunk. When he did it, Bristol let out a little squeal, and he smiled at her. Oh, believe me, it's better for her, safer for her, now that she can't make trouble and try to fight. Now, tape her ankles together. Once Bristol finally finished, he pushed Melody's legs down and slammed the trunk and then held out his hand. Give me the keys. She handed him the keys to her car. You go get in the driver's side. She did as ordered. He climbed into the passenger side and handed her the keys. Don't worry, we're not going very far, just down the street to your house. He pointed the gun at her. You make one false move. You drive too fast. You drive too slow. You flash your lights, anything, and you're dead. Got it? She nodded her head as her breath hitched. Go to your house and pull up in the driveway. She drove down the street, but as she passed the car she knew belonged to a Meritech, she pressed on the brakes a few times. Why are you slowing down so much? He yelled. I don't want to jostle her around in the trunk. I'm trying to be careful, she said as she pressed her brakes a few more times and then turned slowly into the old driveway. Banny forced Bristol inside the house and threw her to the floor, and Christina Palma came running in from the kitchen, swinging her cane at him, and he slapped her across the face and she went down. Keeping the gun pointed at the woman, he nodded at Bristol. Bring 2 chairs from the dining table and put them right here, back to back. She did as he asked. Now, get your grandmother into a chair. Now get your grandmother into a chair. Together they lifted Christina from the floor and set her in a chair. Then Banny made Bristol sit on the other chair, and he put the gun in his waistband and began taping the 2 women together. When he thought it was good enough, he threw down the tape and headed to the bedroom. He grabbed a pillowcase off the pillow on the bed, opened the safe, and emptied its contents into the case, then went back into the living room. He cursed both women as he ranted, walking back and forth. You made me have to do this, and now you're going to die. You thought you could play me? He pulled on his phone. Deuce, get red. He pulled out his phone, Deuce, get Red and Dax and get over here at the Palmas and bring gas. You don't even have to come inside. Just burn this place down. Burn it down and meet me at the place in Santa Ana. I have your money. Just do it. He looked up at the 2 women. You're going to die a horrible death, and that's your own fault. Bristol sobbed. What about Melody? Oh, don't you worry about your pretty little friend. I'm going to keep her alive for a while. We're going to have a great time, me and Melody. She'll eventually beg for death, and I'll eventually grant her wish. New scene. Agent Brown was writing a report when Bristol's car passed him. She flashed her brake light several times, which got his attention. He pulled up one of the outside cams and watched closely. She wasn't alone. Banny got out of the passenger side of the car and went to her and opened her door for her. She got out slowly. He pointed to the front door, and then he pulled a gun from his waistband and pressed it to the small of her back. Brown immediately hit the active shooter button on his dash. What do you got? Jeff Davis said quickly. Looks like he's making his move. Benoit has a gun to Bristol's back and is forcing her into the home. Do you want me to intercept or intervene? No, wait for backup. How long? A minute, maybe 2. Agent Brown couldn't stay put. Faye, take over monitoring the action and let me know what he's saying inside that house. I'm switching to comms and getting closer. Vest up, Jeff said. Yes, sir. Agent Brown moved fast and in only seconds was crouched down between the privacy fence that lined the driveway and Bristol's car. He had eyes on both the front door and the side door, which is actually the kitchen door. What is that sound? He asked aloud. He listened hard, his eyes on the car, and he realized a car was moving back and forth, and what he heard was someone yelling. Davis, I think there's someone in the car. No one in the front or back seat, so I'm reaching inside to pop the trunk. He opened the front passenger door, reached over, and hit the lever. The trunk popped up. He quickly moved back to the trunk and peered inside, and his eyes got big. Davis, it's Melody. Scanning her quickly, it looked like she had a head wound. There was duct tape circling loosely around her neck, which he surmised she'd pulled down off her mouth. Her hands and feet were also taped. Okay, honey, okay, I've got you. Shh, no more yelling. I'm going to pull you up, but we have to be quiet. We don't want Banny to know that you've escaped. Melody got quiet and allowed the agent to lift her from the trunk. He closed it gently but firmly. Okay, sweetie, listen. I'm going to move you just to the other side of this fence so that he can't see you. And then I'll be gone a minute while I do my job, okay? Don't scream, no noise. You got it? She nodded her head. She was shaking so hard he didn't think she could speak anyway. Jeff spoke quietly. Brown, I'm coming up the street from the church. Agents Wyatt and Trot are moving in from the north end of the street. There are 2 paramedics coming at you on foot. Hand her off to them. Huntington police are on their way. They will wait for the other 3 perps to commit arson and then take them. You take out Benoit the moment he walks outside. Trout and Wyatt will secure the Palmas. Roger, Brown said. Brown, this is Fay. He's headed toward the door now. He's still yelling at the women, threatening to kill them himself, but his gun is still tucked inside his waistband, the front right side. He has a pillowcase in his left hand, filled with the safe contents. He's at the door now. He should be stepping out in about 5 seconds. Brown had moved to the left of the front door, calmly waiting, allowing the anger to simmer. A few seconds later, Banny stepped out the front door of the Palma home. In another second, he was disarmed, lifted, body slammed face down, and cuffed. Banny was yelling. Sorry. Banny was yelling and cursing. A police cruiser pulled up. Banny was quickly searched and placed inside the car, and the door shut, and he was promptly taken away from the scene. While that was going on, Wyatt and Trout entered the home and closed the door behind them so that no one would know that the women were now safe. Christina and Bristol Palma looked up as they entered, their eyes wide with terror, and Trout smiled kindly. It's okay, ladies. We're the good guys. Let's get you out of this mess. Scissors are over there in that hutch in the dining room in the right-hand drawer, Christina said firmly. Both agents smiled. Brown had told them that this lady was strong. She didn't even seem fazed. Trout grabbed the scissors and cut away several layers of duct tape. Davis, the girls are secure, he said, and then smiled as he helped the older lady to her feet. Okay, ladies, he said, we're going to go out the kitchen door and head quietly up the side of the fence. No noise in case Banny's friends have arrived. We want them to think that you're still secure inside the house. Both of them nodded and followed Agent Wyatt out the kitchen door. The sun had set, and the 4 people crept through the dark to the street. The ladies were picked up by Jeff and taken down the street to the church parking lot. There were 2 ambulances there, no flashing lights. 2 paramedics began checking over the Palma ladies. The other 2 had already been working on Melody. Her blood pressure was low. She was shaking uncontrollably. Tears coursed down her cheeks. Melody, a medic said kindly, my name is Bobby. We're going to take good care of you. Your pressure's dropping, and we're going to start an IV. She sniffed and looked past him to the agent standing beside the door. Agent, will you call my boyfriend? The agent spoke to his boss and turned back toward Melody with a smile. Director Davis says he's already been contacted and is on the way. He should be here any minute. He wasn't far away. The paramedics worked on starting an IV. They'd already cut the duct tape from her hands and feet. Did Agent Brown get Banny? She asked the agent. Her breath labored. He did. So Bristol and her grandma are okay? They are. They're right here next to you, being looked over to make sure there are no injuries. Melody sniffed. Oh, thank you, Lord. Thank you, she murmured. Logan came flying into the parking lot, jumped out of his car, and headed to the ambulances. The agent pointed. She's in here. The paramedic got out of the ambulance. Go in all the way to the head of the gurney. Thank you, he said as he climbed in, and the medic climbed back in behind him. Melody looked up at him and immediately relaxed. Logan, she whispered as she cried. I'm here, baby. I'm here, and you're safe. Everything is okay. He took her hand that she held out to him and bent over and kissed her forehead. How are you feeling? I heard you got hit in the head. She nodded. Yeah, and I'm not feeling very good. The paramedic looked at him. Her blood pressure's low. The head injury might be causing some pressure on the brain. We're getting ready to transport. Can I stay? He asked. Yes, I think your presence is helping. You're all blurry, Logan, she complained. Can I get a tissue to wipe my eyes? The medic handed a square sponge pad to Logan and started talking rapidly on his radio. He received instruction and started fastening her belts. Logan wiped Melody's eyes. It's not helping. Everything is all blurry, she complained. Logan looked to the paramedic. He was frowning as he took her blood pressure again. Logan looked back at Melody when her hand jerked on his. She's seizing, the medic stated calmly. He spoke again into his radio. The other paramedic closed the back doors of the ambulance, and in seconds they were speeding toward the hospital. New scene, it is still December 16th, Monday evening, Redwood Hills Medical Center, Los Angeles, California. Eric Sr. looked around the room. He'd been made aware that almost 4 months ago his family had gathered in this very room as they prayed for him and Gabe. Today it was only he and his wife, Mark and his sons, young Eric and Jordan, and Taylor, and the Keith family. Taylor had immediately called Gabe, and he had contacted the prayer warriors on both Gabe's site and Isla's site, and had just finished a live stream prayer about 15 minutes ago. The circle had begun and wouldn't stop for sweet Melody. The Keith males, David, Philip, and Lyle, were being comforted by Mark, while Carol Keith was currently enfolded in Shelley's arms. In a corner, Logan, JoJo, young Eric, and Jordan and Taylor stood in a huddle. JoJo had his hand on Logan's shoulder, while young Eric reached up and ruffled Logan's hair. Eric Sr. nodded. He felt strongly that all was well. They all quieted and turned as Jeffy walked into the room. She had a sweet smile on her face, which was immediately comforting to see. Okay, everyone, Jeffy said quickly, there is good news. As you know, she was hit on the upper back portion of her head with a gun. It was hard enough to break the skin and crack her skull. She began to lose her vision and started seizing, which we believed to be caused from pressure on the brain due to swelling or bleeding, and she became comatose. We did a scan and saw there was a linear skull fracture with some bleeding and fluid buildup. We intended to perform a surgery to repair the bleed. Hang on 1 minute. I gotta let a cat out of the house. Let's see. We intended to perform surgery to repair the bleed. Jeffy smiled. And that's when the miracle occurred. About 20 minutes ago, as we were preparing to take her into the OR, she opened her eyes. She sat up and spoke to us. You understand that she shouldn't have been able to do that. I wanted another scan. I stayed right there with her. I could still see the fracture, though it seemed less clear, just a hairline fracture now. And the big thing, though, was there was no brain bleed, no fluid buildup of any kind. There was nothing there. She spoke to me in clear, concise sentences. She was tired, but alert, and asking for Logan and her family. Jeffy smiled, and she said she was so sorry that she ruined Kel-Bel's birthday dinner. The group smiled. Jeffy sighed. I'm telling you right now, we didn't misread the original scan. She's been healed. So your prayers and the millions of prayer warriors have once again achieved a miracle. God has heard and answered our prayers. We've stitched up the cut on her head and will observe her overnight, and if all stays well, she can go home tomorrow. Thank you, Father, Carol Keith whispered. Everyone in the room agreed. So you may come and visit her 2 at a time. Try to keep it quiet, though I know you feel like jumping for joy and praising God, because I feel the same way. I thought this was going to be another long night, like the night of August 25th. She glanced at her father. He sighed. Sorry. Everyone gave a soft laugh. Jeffy smiled. So, Mr. and Mrs. Keith, you want to follow me back? I'll take you to her. Jeffy and the Keiths left the room, and the rest of them immediately gathered together, knelt in a circle, joined hands, and thanked the Lord. Just as they finished praying, the door of the private waiting room opened, and Reverend Clark came in. He smiled. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late. I wanted to see to Mrs. Palma and make sure some of the other ladies were looking after her. Bristol wanted to come with me, but the police were questioning her, so she wanted me to give Melody a message. He looked around. So, if I were to read the room, I'd say our girl is doing okay. Eric Sr. smiled and nodded and moved to shake Ronnie's hand. Yes, it seems God has worked another miracle in our lives. Eric went on to explain the situation to Ronnie. Mark Adams took a phone call from his brother Joey. Jordan and Taylor headed to the restroom, and young Eric, JoJo, Logan, Philip, and Kyle stood together talking in soft tones. Young Eric placed his hand on Philip's shoulder in a comforting gesture. Hey, guy, you having flashbacks? Philip nodded, yes. And I'm so glad that Melody didn't have to go through what I did. I'm really grateful. Me too, Lyle said. I mean, I've only just begun to really feel, like God is real. Like listening to us and stuff, but this is just too cool. The guys all nodded. Logan, JoJo said, are you okay? He nodded, yes. I too am so grateful, he said quietly, having to choke back the emotions clogging his throat. Philip looked him over. He could tell that this guy, he was totally in love with Melody. This time last year, Philip wouldn't have even cared very much who his sister was dating or not dating. Their entire family dynamic had changed since Melody became involved with the Kino family. They were realizing and understanding how beautiful, how powerful family is, and combining that with feeling so much closer to God, it has suddenly made life so different. It's made it amazing. It makes it so that he looks forward to every day. He feels happy inside, even when it's just a normal day and nothing super amazing was happening. And then things like today, almost losing Mel, and God steps in and fixes her. And seeing this guy right here, this Logan Adams, who is such a powerful guy and is obviously so in love with Mel. Philip couldn't even describe why this all makes him feel so happy. Jordan and Taylor came back in the room and joined the young men. Okay, everyone, Mark said. That was Joey. You want to hear some details? They all quieted. As you already know, Benoit Cruz was arrested. They are throwing the book at him. He's been charged with robbery, elderly abuse, felony theft. He looked at Ronnie. That is the money he took from the church. He's also being charged with aggravated kidnapping, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. That was against Bristol and Melody. Solicitation of murder. That was Bristol and Mrs. Palma. And solicitation of arson. Joey is sending some of you a video of what took place in the church parking lot today and also at the Palma home. Do not share it with anyone because it's an ongoing case. Okay, so Vanny's 3 friends were also arrested as they were pouring gas around the foundation and on the porch of the Palma home. They are being charged with conspiracy to commit arson, conspiracy to commit murder, and conspiracy felony theft, along with several other crimes already uncovered during our covert investigation, including child pornography, aggravated sexual assault, and possession with intent to distribute. Wow, Jordan mumbled. I mean, these are some really bad guys. Yes, they are, Mark agreed, and they're going down. We have video evidence of almost every crime they've been charged with. On another note, Vanny smacked Mrs. Palma upside the head pretty hard. She's been checked out by a doctor and she's okay. Bristol is also okay, though she is emotionally distraught. The poor kid has had a pretty hard life and is going to need some counseling. He looked up at his stepfather. Eric, I was hoping you might be able to recommend someone or maybe have a session or 2 with her yourself. Eric nodded. I will be happy to step in and help her. She's a sweet girl, and it wasn't a coincidence that she was brought to our attention and rescued from the evil plans of Satan. Who knows what God has in store for her? Okay, so that's one case. Shall we discuss the other case? Young Eric asked as he smiled at JoJo. Mark also smiled and nodded. I'm sure you've all seen the news and know about the little altercation JoJo was involved in this morning at school. He came upon some guy beating up his girlfriend and he intervened. Police believe he saved her life because the guy was way out of control. The guy's name is Scott Newman. Girl is Cali Quinn. She's currently at LA General with a broken cheekbone, a laceration on her forehead, and a face swollen beyond recognition. Newman will have a bond hearing in the morning. Is he a student at the school? Philip asked. No. He's 27 years old and works for Apex Windows and Shutters, installing said windows and shutters. He met Kaylee when he was installing shutters for the apartments where Kaylee lives and her older sister. Is she going to be okay? Shelley asked. Eventually. Right now, the problem is him getting out and coming right back after her, or after JoJo. That's not a problem for me, JoJo said. Mark smiled. I understand. But I don't want you to re-injure your shoulder. Oh, you guys should see the video, young Eric said with a grin. He took him out with the most beautiful kick. I mean, he went down hard. And while JoJo was kicking, he was using his left hand to hold his right arm still. It was so good. Everyone smiled in appreciation. Mark frowned. It's possible he won't be stupid enough to come back after Cali or JoJo, but our experience shows most of these kind of bullies are not real smart and do indeed come right back. What kind of bond will he have to post? Eric asked. Mark nodded. I've been speaking with the assistant DA on the case and asked for the max, which is $50,000. This is not the guy's first rodeo. He's been arrested 2 other times for domestic violence. The first time it was a misdemeanor. The second time it was felony. He was convicted both times. First time he got a year, but only served 6 months. Second time he got 3 years and served 1. First crime was committed in Oregon. Second one was up in San Francisco. Because of those priors and because of how severely Cali was beaten, I'm hoping to get the max, and I'm hoping he won't be able to come up with that. Well, how is he set financially? Eric asked. Paycheck to paycheck. He lives in the basement of a home, top floor occupied by USC students. Well, how did he post bail the last time, then? Jordan asked. Young Eric glanced at her. She was obviously shaken by this news. He put his arm around her. Mark nodded. Well, first time it was only $1,000. Second time he used a bail bond to post $10,000, and his uncle put up the house. He'd have to go that route again. Taylor shook her head. What is up with these people, always trying to hurt girls? And why don't girls be more careful? I mean, like in who they choose to date. Well, Tay, JoJo began, not all girls come from a stable family. These 2 sisters were raised by elderly parents. Father's handicapped, mother is elderly. They headed out into the world pretty naive, and they have very little resources to help. Do they live in California? I mean, does their family live in California? Taylor asked. JoJo shook his head. No, they live in Oklahoma, in a small and very poor town. Mark nodded. The sisters are Native American, the Quapaw Nation, and their parents live in the town of Quapaw, which has a population of less than 1,000 people. Well, after I get to see Melody, JoJo said, I'm going back over there to check on them. I mean, they don't have anyone to help them. Well, they do now, Shelley said. Can I meet them? Taylor asked. We'll see, Tay. Let me find out a little more about their situation and what they need, and then you guys can descend upon them, JoJo said. Logan's eyes met young Eric's. As they could tell, JoJo was more interested than usual, and they smiled. New scene. So sorry. Melody smiled as her mother and father came into the room. Mom, Dad. That was all she could get out before the tears began. They came to either side of her bed. Her mother gently leaned over and kissed her forehead. Her father placed his hand lightly on the top of her head. Hello, my girl, he said softly. Hey, Dad. How are you feeling? I'm fine. I have a headache is all, and I'm really tired. You have a fractured skull, Carol said firmly. Yes, but it's just a tiny fracture. No big deal. They said it will heal on its own, and I just need to not run or jump on a trampoline, she said with a smile, and then frowned. I'm sorry I made you guys worry. Don't be silly. It wasn't your fault, David said. And no second guessing. You did what you had to do. Melody nodded. Bristol was so scared of him. I couldn't not come to help her. Jeff said Bristol is okay. Is that right? Yes, honey, Carol said. She's good. Did they get Banny? Yes, they did, David said, but I haven't heard any details yet. I know they arrested him right after Agent Brown handed you off to the paramedics. That's all I know. Well, thank goodness Agent Brown heard you screaming inside that trunk, Carol said. My sweet girl, you must have been terrified. Oh, I was, but really what I was afraid of was never seeing my family or Logan again. Oh, you're really close to Logan, huh, sweetheart? Carol asked. Oh, Mom, I love him so much. Her father frowned. You've only known him less than 2 months. Don't you think it's a little too soon to be in love with him? David asked. Melody giggled. Yes, but I am in love with him. I really am.
Well, let's take some time to talk about this later, David said. Right now, sweetheart, I'm just very grateful that you're alive and well.
Me too. Jeffy said it was a miracle. She said one minute I was in need of brain surgery, and the next I was sitting up and talking like normal.
I'm so grateful, Carol said. Me too, David said. While we were in the waiting
Room, I was thinking that 2 of my children have had serious head injuries in the past 2 months, and I was worrying and wondering what Lyle had coming.
Don't borrow trouble, honey, Carol said. Are the boys here? Mel asked. Yes, they've been very worried about you, her father answered. Carol smiled. They've grown up so much, it seems our whole family has changed. What do you mean, Mom? Well, I can't really explain it, but just the way we are with each other, the way we seem closer and more loving toward each other. Maybe it was going out to give the backpacks to the homeless or just going to church together. Melody smiled. She knew what the difference was. They had changed, and she had changed, and it was because of the Kinos and Adams families. They set such a good example of how God's children should live. The cool thing is, when you start living how Jesus would have you live, you start feeling Him and feeling His Spirit, hearing His voice, seeing things from His perspective, and it starts changing your life. First in little ways, and then suddenly you realize you feel different. You feel joyful, and you only want to get closer and closer to God. And how do you do that? By praying and keeping His commandments and serving others. Love one another as I have loved you. Melody sighed. She was so blessed. New scene. After her parents visited with her, Melody had a very nice conversation with her 2 brothers, who were unusually kind and loving. Apparently, they had been very worried about her. After them, her employers, Grandmaster Kino and Miss Shelley, visited, and after giving her encouraging words and praying over her, they gave her cards the kids had made for her for a Christmas present, but had insisted on giving to her now to make sure Melody knew how much the children loved her. After that, Jordan and Taylor visited. Melody felt very close to them. She somehow knew that they would always be like the sisters that she'd never had. They had her giggling over things, and when it came time for them to leave, she desperately wanted them to stay. So they had to make promises to have some girl time together soon and add Desi to the mix. Next, Mr. Adams and Reverend Clark came in. The Reverend thanked her for being Bristol's friend and coming to visit the church in the first place. He said it was because of her that the bad guys' plans had been foiled and that she was a special child of God. Mark had agreed with the Reverend and told her how grateful he was for her miracle healing, for her sake and for the sake of his son. He also let her know that little Kelston refused to have a birthday party without Mel and would wait until Melody could finally come to dinner, no matter how long it takes. He then gave her well wishes from his own wife and daughter, and finally he filled her in on the information on the case before he and Reverend Clark took their leave. Next, young Eric and JoJo stepped in. They too made jokes and had her laughing, though their jokes were mostly about how worried Logan had been, and they also teased her and told her they'd watched the video from the parking lot and wondered why she didn't employ any of the self-defense techniques she'd been taught. They'd both kissed her on her cheek before they left, and she had to sigh. Something about the guys, the cousins who called themselves brothers. They, like Logan, had a powerful presence. Still, she was tired after having spoken to everyone, and while she waited for the most important person in her life to come in to see her, she fell asleep. Logan crept in quietly. He'd been patient. He'd insisted everyone else go first because he was going to stay. He would not be leaving her. He encouraged the Keiths to go home and get some rest. He promised that if anything changed, he'd call them first thing. He'd almost had to beg. Her father seemed a little uneasy about it. Logan didn't know how to soothe him right now. He just knew that he wasn't leaving Melody. Besides, when she'd been rescued and brought to the ambulance, the first thing she did was ask for him, and he was going to stay by her side. He neared the bed and looked down on her sleeping form. His heart swelled. She was the sweetest girl in the world, and Vanny had tried to take her down. It made him want to kill. Again. He sighed. She had dark circles under her eyes. There was a white bandage that circled her head, and it made her look like a Native American. All she needed was to stick a feather in the band. Her cheeks were rosy, and he hoped that wasn't because of a fever. He stood still, gazing at her when her eyes blinked open and she smiled. "Logan," she said softly. "Melody?" He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "How you feeling, babe?" "I'm good. I'm just sleepy. I feel like I run a marathon." "Well, in a way, I guess you have." He sniffed back the emotions. "Mel?" "Thank God for Agent Brown. Thank God you're okay. I don't know what I would do if I were to lose you." "I can't imagine. I just know that I am so grateful that you're right here in front of me, speaking and smiling and alive and well." "Me too. When I was stuck in that trunk, I thought I'd never see you again. You were all I could think about, and I prayed. I begged Jesus to please help me. I expended so much energy trying to kick out the backlights of the car." "Well, you doing that was what made Agent Brown find you." He said the car was rocking, and he figured out there was someone in the trunk. "I can't tell you how happy I was when I saw him looking down at me. He told me to be quiet, so I guess I was making a lot of noise." Logan smiled. "Yeah, fighting for your life can be noisy." She held out her hand, and Logan took it immediately. "Logan, I'm so tired. If I fall asleep, are you going to leave me?" "No, baby. I'm staying right here." "Really?" He chuckled. "Yes, really. Is that so hard to believe?" She smiled. "I just want to make sure. I'm here. Sleep." She sniffed back tears. "I love you, Logan Adams." "I love you too, Melody Keith." He squeezed her hand and watched as she succumbed to the weariness she felt. "Thank you, Jesus," he whispered for the 1,000th time. He sat thinking about what he'd just seen on the parking lot video. Banny's arm around her throat, his gun to her head. It made him wish the guy was not in police custody. He had to get this anger under control. He needed to talk to his father, or maybe to his grandfather. The old feelings were surfacing. The feelings of how he felt after he'd shot and killed his own biological father. It wasn't that he felt guilty. It was the opposite. He felt good about it. He almost wished he could do it again. Like his father suffering and or feeling insulted that a kid had gotten the best of him was not enough. He suffered for only a few seconds, while his mother had suffered for years, years of terror. He sighed. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Logan kept telling himself that. He closed his eyes and silently prayed. And that is the end of chapter 21.